Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Hawks Latest, your number one source for news, updates, rumors, opinions, and you guessed it, the latest and the greatest regarding the Atlanta Hawks. I'm your host, Zach Langley, aka Langley ATL, and today we've got a full slate of updates to break down. This is the 100th episode of Hawks Latest presented by FanArch. It's super cool to finally reach 100. It's been an awesome offseason. It has been super fun to cover every move Atlanta has made and speculate on what Atlanta might do. I'm entering my first season with this channel, so best believe as soon as that season gets started, every single day, like always, just keeping you guys informed on the latest and the greatest. But really today, we've got a lot to talk about. So we are just days away from the beginning of Hawks training camp, which is super cool. And after a summer filled with blockbuster trades and shocking roster moves, things you wouldn't expect whatsoever, and even a few eyebrow-raising decisions, a few questionable decisions, it's been a very polarizing offseason. I mean, that's the only real way you can describe it. This is shaping up to be one of the most intriguing training camps we've seen in years, especially after some of these recent moves Atlanta has made. So we'll dive into Atlanta's surprising Kobe Buffkin trade. They dealt their promising third-year guard. Some speculated that was a little too early to give up on a guy like Buffkin, but the front office wasn't necessarily happy with what they were seeing, and there are whispers that Buffkin's camp might have pushed for a little bit. Might have pushed for a trade, so that wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if that eventually came out. But we're going to break down what this all means for the team heading into the new season, how it impacts their roster, their flexibility, everything. We'll break down the internal battles for the final roster spots. Atlanta now has two open, like I said, because of the Kobe Buffkin trade, and then we're going to discuss some fascinating comments from a anonymous Western Conference coach about Trae Young's playoff success. And I'm going to leave y'all hanging on whether y'all think that's good or bad, whether they were praising Trae or criticizing him. You'll just have to see in a minute. And then we're going to look at two potential external targets the Hawks might consider to round out the roster. We're going to be breaking down internal targets, and then we're going to close with two external targets that I think are very intriguing. So there is a lot to cover today, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Waste no more time. Training camp is officially right around the corner, and this year's edition is shaping up to be a battle for the ages. That's putting it lightly. After an electric offseason that included some high-profile trades, very clever signings like the Nikhil one, the Luke Kennard one, and a few roster gambles, definitely some bold moves. The Hawks will finally return to the hardwood to begin preparation for the 2025-26 season. Media day is on Monday, and then immediately after that, training camp begins. We've already seen it's begun for several teams. The Knicks, the Nets, the Pelicans. They're all getting started. The Pelicans right now are getting a lot of offseason hype after they were criticized all offseason. Apparently, they're looking pretty good in training camp, so I wouldn't be too worried there though. Zion Williamson's going to gain all that weight back like 2 months into the season. Despite all the excitement, the front office has managed to keep things flexible, and that has been the number one thing that new GM Anzi Saleh has kind of focused on this offseason. Despite the blockbuster moves, the bringing in Kristaps Porzingis' $30 million contract, although it's only 1 year, he's focused on flexibility, keeping your options open. That's always a very smart approach when trying to build a winner in the modern era of the NBA. Atlanta actually heads into camp with two open roster spots. Now, they could obviously fill those over the next few days just before camp, and so then it would be kind of what I said right there wouldn't exactly be true, but it's the same idea. Y'all get what I'm trying to say. Most expected that the Hawks would, just enter the season with just one vacancy. I know I did, but a quiet Monday afternoon changed everything when Atlanta shocked the league by trading third-year guard Kobe Buffkin to the Brooklyn Nets for cash considerations. Buffkin was a promising young guard who was once viewed as, part of the Hawks' future core. But he's now gone, and the move has created plenty of speculation, not just among Hawks fans, but within people in NBA circles. Some believe Atlanta could be using that extra roster flexibility to pursue one of the polarizing guards that are still on the market, the veteran guards, names like Russell Westbrook, who was very surprisingly unsigned. I think he had a very underrated season with the Denver Nuggets last year, but nonetheless, he is still a free agent. Or a guy like Ben Simmons. Those two names have been floated around, thrown around in rumors really for months, but especially recently now that Atlanta has that open roster spot and kind of a need at the backup guard. But the more realistic path for the Atlanta Hawks would be to look inward first. And that's where things really get interesting because there's a lot to consider here. With two open roster spots, up for grabs, all eyes are going to be on Atlanta's internal candidates because those are the realistic options. And we're going to see who can seize that opportunity all through training camp. Leading that group are the players that are currently on two-way contracts. Guys like Keaton Wallace, Jacob Toppin, and Ellie Njai. Those are Atlanta's 3 signed two-ways, but, we always see two-ways get called up and maybe even get their contract converted if they impress. And this could be a situation of that. I actually think it's the most realistic option. Sorry, I literally can't talk today. I don't know if it's because it's the 100th episode or what. But among the guys, I think the guy with the most realistic shot at earning a full-time roster spot is Keaton Wallace. I was actually very surprised when Keaton Wallace was signed to a two-way deal this offseason with the Hawks. He was a restricted free agent. I just full-on assumed that Atlanta would give him a standard deal, honestly, over a guy like Nikola Jurisic, who has a lot of potential. But Keaton Wallace, in his rookie year, really proved that he's eventually going to be a pretty quality backup guard in the NBA. I really liked what I saw out of him on the defensive end especially, but he had some games on offense. He made most of his limited minutes last season. He didn't play a whole lot, but he was called up every now and then to showcase what he has, and he played well. Last season he averaged 5.4 points, 1.6 rebounds, and 2.6 assists per game. Like I said, in limited minutes, only like 15. I don't have the numbers here, but it was like 15 minutes a game. His standout moment of the season came in the Hawks' final regular season game against the Orlando Magic. Now, while you can't really judge the last game of the season with too much merit, with too much on the line, because the in the last game of the season, the rosters that are on the court, it's funny. It's always been funny just seeing what rotation the coaches run out with the last day of the season, the regular season, just because teams already have everything clinched. So you're seeing the guys at the end of the bench really step into a role that they haven't played a whole lot. So you see some hilarious stat lines. But this one, I think, in my personal opinion, was a bit of an outlier. I don't think that this performance is just another case of a player overperforming just because it's the last day of the regular season. I think Keaton Wallace really kind of proved something here. He recorded his first career triple-double, and it wasn't just a barely triple-double. I mean, he killed it. He had 15 points, 11 rebounds, 15 assists, and 5 steals. That's a 5x4. That performance turned heads in the front office and, may have potentially paved the way for a promotion if he shines in camp. I think they really value Keaton Wallace. I think that made the decision to get rid of Kobe Buffkin just a little bit easier. While it was still a tough decision, I think, having insurance and a guy like Wallace really did help them. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if his contract got converted. But what he has to do first is shine in training camp, which I'm sure he will. Jacob Toppin and Ellie Njai, Atlanta's other two-way guys, they also impressed during Summer League, but they do face an uphill climb due to Atlanta's forward-heavy roster. There's no surprise there. Toppin, in particular, has a pretty good shot to make some noise this upcoming season. He had an eye-opening summer. He averaged 15.3 points, 7.3 rebounds, and 1.7 assists before suffering that hip injury, which sidelined him for the remainder of Summer League. But he still got some very good action. He still played in several games. Those 7.3 rebounds are crucial. I mean, this is a guy who's playing the small forward, grabbing over 7 rebounds a game. No matter how many minutes you're playing per game, that is still very impressive for a 3. With injuries always a factor during the long NBA season, though, nothing can be ruled out. But the competition will be fierce, and it's going to be very exciting. Beyond the two-way players, several others on Exhibit 10 contracts will look to make a name for themselves. The most notable is Caleb Houston, and he's a young and promising forward that many believe would sign a standard NBA deal after having a very much improved second season in the NBA. I thought he played pretty well for the Magic, especially in spot minutes. In the second half of the season, he shot very well. I think he shot over 50% from 3 in the second half of the season when he really got into Orlando's rotation. And, it made no sense for the Magic to let him walk. I don't really understand any of this with Caleb Houston. It's a really confusing ordeal just because the Magic have struggled from beyond the arc for, the entire Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner era. But they're letting go of a guy who shot over 40% from deep last season, over 50% in the second half of the season. I don't get it personally, and I honestly don't get not signing him to an official deal if you're the Atlanta Hawks. But this Exhibit 10 deal has a very high chance of being converted to a standard contract. Maybe the two realistic guys who could fill the Atlanta's final 2 roster spots could be Keaton Wallace and Caleb Houston, because Atlanta brought him in on that Exhibit 10, but they're giving him the opportunity here, just kind of like a non-guaranteed 1-year tryout that allows players to showcase their skills during training camp. That's what Exhibit 10 deals are, and I think Atlanta does value Houston. It was a very weird situation when the signing was reported, but we didn't hear about it for another month. We thought it was just going to be a standard 1-year deal, but then it eventually was reported that it was that Exhibit 10. So very confusing situation. Nonetheless, I believe in Houston, and I think he can impress in training camp. Joining Houston, with that Exhibit 10 deal is Charles Bassey and also Kobe Johnson, who is the younger brother of Hawks forward Jalen Johnson. Bassey is physical. He's a very underrated big man with some strong rebounding skills, very good rebounder for his size, and he's going to compete directly with N'Faly Dante for a potential roster spot. Now, Dante is officially on the roster for next season. He's part of the 15-man roster. He's Atlanta's 3rd big. However, his money isn't all the way guaranteed past his first year. So, I mean, you can bring in another center with one of those final roster spots. The battle between those two is going to be pretty fun to watch, and it's going to be one of the more entertaining matchups of camp. With so much young talent and 2 roster spots at stake, every scrimmage and preseason game is going to carry extra weight. Hawks fans need to buckle up because this training camp is going to be fun, and I can't wait to, cover it on this channel every single day because, there are going to be some significant updates as we progress into training camp and then preseason and then the regular season. So now let's move on from, the roster battles. And while those are fascinating, no conversation about the Hawks is complete without discussing their franchise star, Trae Young. So as we know, Young is one of the most polarizing players in the entire NBA. He has been his whole career. That elite playmaking, deep shooting range, and ability to control a game are undeniable. Also one of the clutchest players, statistically, actually, of all time. He's oh my God, I forgot the stat. But there was a number. He was like 3rd or 4th in playoff game winners. It was something. It was definitely a little more specific than that, but nonetheless, he's in some elite company there. Critics often point to his size, defensive shortcomings, and Atlanta's lack of recent playoff success, and that's where his critics really, kind of slander his game. However, a recent ESPN article featuring quotes from a Western Conference assistant coach might shift that narrative. It was actually an anonymous coach, so we don't know exactly what team he is coming from, but he praised Trae. He kind of gave Trae a little bit of recognition. He said, they have a lot of what ifs, but Trae Young is really good, and compared to a lot of his peers, he has had real playoff success that he doesn't get enough credit for. And that's a fair point. I mean, many forget that in 2021, Young led the Hawks all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, coming within 2 wins of the NBA Finals. Likely would have gone to the NBA Finals if Trae didn't hurt his ankle by stepping on the ref. The most unfortunate situation ever. Despite not winning another playoff series since, you've got to consider context. But that run remains one of the most impressive by a young point guard in recent memory. I think a lot of recency bias has affected how people view Trae, and I don't think that's fair to him when you consider the rosters that he has been, that the Atlanta Hawks have put around him. They identified that he needed a co-star after that 2021 Conference Finals run. They waited a year to do that, and then they brought in another point guard to be that co-star, which really made no sense. But nonetheless, that's in the past. Atlanta's been building a very good core for him, and now next season he has the best roster he's ever had. So I think those narratives are going to shift in a big way. It's also important to note that some of Atlanta's postseason struggles stem from like I said, the questionable roster construction. And when I mentioned that he's going to have the best roster around him, I'm talking about Kristaps Porzingis, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Luke Kennard, even guys like rookie Asa Newell, joining that core of Dyson Daniels, Jalen Johnson, Zachary Rieseshay. The Hawks have built what could be the most complete roster of Young's career. It's that good. If Atlanta stays healthy, this could be the season where Trae reminds everyone why he belongs in the conversation among the league's best stars. I think, ESPN ranked him as the 29th best player in the NBA, and while I think that's probably a little fair for right now, I still think he should be higher, but I think he's going to prove to them that he should be way higher. Because if Trae's at 29, there's no reason at all that Jalen Brunson should be in the top 10. I saw that. They actually released that yesterday morning after that my video yesterday was put out, and I was like, that is absolutely ridiculous. Jalen Brunson, what has he proven? They're gonna say everything that Jalen Brunson has done. It doesn't compare. Young's career doesn't compare to his, but Jalen Brunson hasn't won anything more than Trae Young. It really makes no sense to me why he's at 10. He's not. It's not like he's better on the defensive end. Both are defensive liabilities. Young's a better playmaker. Brunson is probably a slightly better scorer, but that's really it. I mean, it doesn't really kind of. It doesn't make it so Brunson could be a top 10 player in the NBA and Young is, barely top 30. That doesn't make sense to me. But nonetheless, let me not talk about that too much because that'll just, send me off on a tangent. So, of course, internal development isn't the only path the Hawks could take to fill their open roster spots because that was, what we talked about in the beginning of the video. But one intriguing external option is Pat Connaughton. So that might be a name familiar to Hawks fans as the Hawks took on the Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals in 2021. He was a key contributor to that team. I'm sure you guys remember. But right now he's a veteran wing who could bring some championship experience and some valuable depth to Atlanta's second unit. And this is a guy that Atlanta should seriously consider if the Charlotte Hornets move off of him. So Connaughton is entering his 11th NBA season after spending the last 8 years with the Milwaukee Bucks. Longtime veteran with the Bucks. His best stretch came during the Bucks 2021 championship run, which Hawks fans are all too familiar with, when he averaged over 9 points a game on 44.1% shooting from three in the finals. I mean, just lit it up from beyond the arc. Key contributor to that team. They probably don't win the finals without him. However, in the past several seasons, the production and his minutes have all declined, and he's entering the final season of a 3-year, $28.2 million contract. So the Bucks got off of him. They attached a pick to send him to the Charlotte Hornets just to get off of that money. They definitely didn't view him as part of their core moving forward, and I don't think the Hornets view him as part of their core moving forward either. The Hornets are currently focused on developing their young core. I mean, they've got guys now like LaMelo Ball and Concanepple, and Brandon Miller, that same core, but, they added Concanepple, they added, who's that guy? Liam McNeely, and, they have some nice players, and, Ryan Kalkbrenner. I mean, this is a team that could, I'm not saying they're going to be anything in the Eastern Conference next season, but, they could take some definite improvements and in a few years be a force. An underrated team, if you will. But the Hornets may decide to cut ties with Pat Connaughton to shed salary. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they did that. That's looking like a very realistic option. If that happens, the Atlanta Hawks could be a very logical landing spot. So if you look at Atlanta's wings, I mean, behind Zachary Rizachet, the Hawks are very thin on experienced wings, and Connaughton's ability to stretch the floor and, defend multiple positions and just kind of provide a good veteran presence, it would fit all nicely into Quinn Snyder's system. I certainly like the idea of it. He wouldn't have to play a whole lot, but he'd be a good veteran voice in that locker room and also, be able to shoot the three ball well and provide spot minutes. Kind of like Larry Nance Jr., how he was last season, but definitely in a lesser role and also different position. So another name to watch is Nick Smith Jr. And yes, we're talking about two Charlotte Hornets right now because the former first-round pick was surprisingly waived by Charlotte just yesterday. I didn't really get that. It's a very questionable decision, but nonetheless, this is a very promising guard. He was waived by his team that is apparently focused on their young core. A lot of confusing things happening out of Charlotte right now. So Smith is only 21 years old, and he's entering the league with, he entered the league with significant hype after a strong high school career in a brief but promising stint at Arkansas. So despite battling knee injuries in college, he showed flashes of potential with the Hornets. I mean, he seriously did. He finished last season averaging, over the final 46 games. This isn't, the full season averages. The full season averages were like 9 points a game. It wasn't too far off from what it ended up being, but he really lit it up in the second half of the season. He averaged 11.9 points, 3 assists, and 2.5 rebounds, all while shooting 37% from three, so very good numbers. Kind of similar to numbers of a guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. For a Hawks team that just traded away Kobe Buffkin are a little thin in the guard room, and while we talked about internal options like Keaton Wallace, maybe guys like Nikola Jurisic, guys that can fit into that role. They could use additional backcourt depth. I mean, you can't get enough of that, especially a team like the Hawks. Smith represents kind of a low-risk, high-upside option, something that we have really talked about in the past several videos. Inviting him to training camp would be a no-brainer. The Hawks have nothing to lose here if they were to invite him to camp, at least fight for that one of those last two roster spots. Maybe you spend your last two roster spots on Nick Smith Jr. and, either like a guy like Charles Bassey or Caleb Houston or just any of those guys. I really wouldn't mind that whatsoever. Inviting him to training camp would be a no-brainer, like I said, giving Atlanta a chance to evaluate his fit alongside the rest of the core, and specifically, the younger guys, because he kind of matches the timeline that Atlanta kind of took to. They kept their young core together this offseason, but they added guys who could really propel them into a championship contention just as early as next season. But they stuck true to their timeline. This is an organization who did not do too much to risk what they potentially have like 5 years down the line. So training camp is only days away, and the Atlanta Hawks enter it with more intrigue than any team in the NBA. 2 open roster spots, a star eager to prove his critics wrong as always, and a front office that has shown it is very unafraid to make bold moves. This is going to be a preseason to remember, and heading into the regular season, it's going to create a lot of hype. So who is going to step up and claim those final roster spots? Let me know in the comments. Will the Hawks add a veteran like Pat Connaughton or take a flyer on some young talent like Nick Smith Jr.? Can Trae Young lead this deep revamped roster back to the Eastern Conference Finals or beyond? Let me know down below. So that's going to do it for today's episode of Hawks Latest. If you enjoyed today's breakdown, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single update here on the channel. We are going to be pumping out videos every single day, keeping you guys informed on the latest and the greatest regarding the Atlanta Hawks. But once again, I'm Zach Langley, aka Langley ATL. This was the 100th episode of Hawks Latest, so I will see you guys next time.